everyone. My name is Jasmine Gui, and I'm the Industry and Education Programmer here at the Toronto Real Asian International Film Festival. Welcome to Rewrites of Passage Editors Table Talk, the first panel of the Real Ideas Conference this year, themed Here in the Future Past. First of all, we would like to start this panel with an acknowledgement that Real Asians offices and main activities are located on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat First Nations. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a treaty of collective responsibility for the protection and sharing of land and resources. This year's our 25th year, and while acknowledging the festival's 25-year history of growth and challenge, we want to renew and refresh our commitments to more abundance and complexity in Asian and Asian diasporic film and media arts. Regardless of our pathways of arrival, we all currently benefit from the Canadian government's broken treaties and imposed violences, and reckon openly with our responsibility to this land and its current caretakers. We would like to name the ways that we are complicit in structures of white supremacy, and also recognize that we're still in a time of great upheaval and need. We honor the longstanding work of organizers, creatives, and communities that continue to give us hope, language, and possibility towards critical and reflexive allyship with Indigenous peoples, exercising their sovereignty and working towards justice and freedom. For today's panel, we would also like to thank the Ontario Cultural Attractions Fund, Ontario Creates, the Province of Ontario, and the Canada Council of the Arts for their support. Just a reminder that if you're watching live from our watch portal and want to ask us questions, that you can send it through the chat or the ask a question box. If you're watching us from a phone, I believe the chat will be at the bottom of your screen. Additionally, I would like to thank Joanne and Carmelle, our amazing ASL interpreters, and Denise, our captioner for today's session. Lastly, we would like to hear your feedback about our panels, so you can visit realasian.com/RI survey and let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you would like to see from our industry panels next year. We will have the QR code posted up at the end of the session. And I believe every entry in our survey enters you into a draw to win a prize. And finally, we will have a 5-minute break in the middle of the session for everyone to stretch their legs and grab some water or take a washroom break. So today's panel is a bit of a special case because usually at this point, I, as the programmer, will introduce the panel moderator. And so I introduce myself. My name is Jasmine. And besides being the programmer at the Real Asian Film Festival, I am also the managing editor of this fantastic book that we put out this year, Rites of Passage, that we put out in honor of Real Asian's 25th anniversary. And, you know, this is the book that we will be talking about today. I would like to bring on the 4 commissioning editors who worked on this book with me, starting with Aaditya, writer, editor, and film curator; Philbert, multimedia producer, interdisciplinary artist, and filmmaker; Nayani, director, producer, and writer; and lastly, Khanh, multidisciplinary artist and programmer. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I mean, as you can hear just from the intro, you know, everybody like wears so many different hats. And it was so fun to draw on that expertise and draw on that breadth of experience for putting this book together. So, you know, I'm really excited to be in conversation with all of you. And we've obviously had quite a few conversations over this year already trying to put this book together. Really excited to hear your thoughts. And I think, I just want to get right into it so that we can, through the process of talking, maybe introduce our audience to the anthology. So maybe if folks want to, give some early thoughts about like when you were thinking about when you were approached by me to do the commissioning, how did that thought process happen for you? What were you considering when you were thinking about who to invite? So does anyone want to be brave and start, or should I be evil and pick?
I can start.
Nayani will start.
Like somebody has to start. Yeah, when Jasmine and I talk about it in the anthology when people read it in our letters from the editors. When Jasmine first approached me to be part of it, I was a little bit hesitant, and I think it's a larger conversation that we're having about expanding kind of accepted notions or assumed notions of like what constitutes Asian. And for me, obviously I understand how as a Tamil woman from, Tamil Eelam or Sri Lanka, however you'll have it, I identify as Asian, and even South Asian is complicated for myself being from the island. And I think for anyone who's from the islands of that region and not part of kind of the mainland, it's complicated in different ways. So I really questioned it and I wasn't sure, but I do believe in reimagining kind of solidarity practices, not in vain, but finding new ways to define what that can look like, and how kind of broader umbrella terms can be a space for coming together transparently and honestly. So I was excited as well. And I decided for myself, and I'm excited to hear what other folks have to say, but I wanted to kind of invite people that I had had conversations with, or that I think had maybe been left out of complicated ideas of what Asian means and is, and give them space, whether they were going to address that or not, to take up space in this anthology. So that was Natalie Younglai, who is the founder of BIPOC TV and Film. She said, we laughed and we said, like, it's kind of being like some kind of Asian. And I think for the contributions that I helped to bring in, that's what I would define those folks as some kind of Asian, and figuring out what that means.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think one of the, I think you said something really true, which was that, they didn't have to address it directly in their pieces, but that they were being invited to take up space in the anthology. And I think that's really the spirit of where this book started to take up momentum and take up space. So yeah, I did feel that. Anyone else?
I can go next. Can you hear me? Yeah, when Jasmine approached me first, I remember feeling a little bit daunted because I've only done editorial work, as kind of short-term gigs in the past. This felt like very enduring, and it is a commitment, it is caretaking for your writers and the contributors that you're working with. So I did have to like take a pause before I did get excited, and it felt like, oh my god, like having an opportunity to work with people whose work I admire and who I want to see something else out of, could be really generative. So yeah, I think that's kind of where it's that was kind of my first reaction, and I was just kind of taking off of what Nayani was saying about the geopolitical definition of Asianness. I did want to kind of steer away from that toward thinking about really just like allowing these writers and these artists to think more about form and think more about the craft really, right? And like things that often are denied many racialized creators, who are often pigeonholed into solely identity-based work. So yeah, I was like curious to like, do some or like encourage people that I'm talking to, whether it's Madi, Sarah, Chibar, Rupali Morzaria, or Saroja Panambalam, to kind of, experiment, to play with genre, to play with form, to like be as kooky or as you know hybrid or as exploratory as possible, like to have fun with it as well. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely kooky. That's anthology is definitely that. Philbert or Khanh?
Yeah, when Jasmine, when you approached me to do this, I remember looking up on Google, what does an editor do? Because I like come from film, and this is like my first dive into like book publication. So like when someone's like, I'm an editor of this thing, I'm like, whoa, cool, that's a huge deal, congrats. But I like didn't actually know like the roles of what to do. So like definitely leaned on Jasmine for like that of like, am I supposed to do this? Like, do I do this? Like, how do I go about doing all the logistics? So that was kind of the first thing, but I think a lot of what Aaditya was saying, like, I was really interested in like the kookiness and like intersecting film with other mediums. So like a lot of the pieces that that I was really fascinated by were like the intersection of like illustration with film, or like poetry and short story, like written poetry and short story, like based off of someone else's film and things like that, like Aram Khan has done, and Toko Hosoya's illustrations. So yeah, I was mostly interested in that. Jasmine also, like, I do some sculptural work, so I think Jasmine, like, having known that, was very much like, you can do some pretty cool things, like, you can do inserts or glue stuff in, and I was like, whoa, okay, every single one. I was like, the whole time I was trying to convince all my contributors to do like flaps and then like stickers and like paper clips. It'll be amazing. And everyone's like, that sounds like Oliver. I was in a conversation with him, and he has much more experience in like publication than I do, and was like, that's a lot of work. Are you guys all gonna do that by hand? And I'm like, we got it, don't worry. And then the other day I was at Jasmine's house folding stuff, and I was like, the consequences of my actions have all come to me now.
Truly.
But it's great. I have no regrets. Like, I'm so happy with it. Yeah.
Truly. Philbert?
Yeah, I think when Jasmine first approached me like almost a year ago, I think the first question that popped in my head was, why? Like, I wasn't sure why I was selected or asked.
Selected.
Yeah, from a lineup. Yeah, I was, there's a little bit of trepidation and hesitation with this type of project. I mean, selfishly, I've always wanted to, wanted to be part of some kind of publication, just for, I don't know, maybe ego reasons. But, I have like dipped my toes into sort of self-publishing with the zine format and like poetry and stuff like that. But, it's all kind of done, in my own room, and like nobody really no real collaboration. It's a very solo act. But I think, the more I thought about it, also because it was, the bulk of the work was done at the start of the pandemic and then throughout the pandemic. And then, midway through, I had to leave Toronto and go to Hong Kong. So navigating that and accepting the role became very therapeutic, with reckoning, seeing the anthology as a very punk thing, I remember when the initial conversations with Jasmine, when she pitched like the aesthetic to me, and how it kind of plays with space and time. You know, my mind is always like off into the sci-fi clouds and speculative clouds. And like, you know, in a, if superficially it might sound weird, but like I was in a very like apocalyptic space. And knowing that the anthology plays with time, and and I wrote this line to Jasmine saying like, oh, it'd be really cool if this anthology, you know, hundreds of years in the future gets dusted off as like some kind of time capsule in a very sci-fi kind of way. And you know, I love punk music too, so I think contributing to something that becomes an artifact. I kept using that word artifact. Like it, for me, it became very healing and therapeutic with everything going on, you know, having to travel during the pandemic, and then being away longer than I've hoped, and then working on the project kept me tethered to the community in Toronto, in North America. So I think like very grateful because it came at the right time, just selfishly for myself to reckon with the situation globally and personally. And yeah, just like it's so cool to be part of it. I know it's a very small part, and like, you know, I've been a part of the Real Asian community for over 10 years. Like I first volunteered in 2010. And I feel like I knew the community and knew the artists, and like I admired many of them from afar. And having worked on this project, I feel like there was so much more of the community that I did not know about, and it was an education to learn more about the artists that I knew and the artists that I didn't know. So it was just kind of a combination of good fortune. So thank you, Jasmine, and thank you to everyone here.
Oh, but so what are these polite rounds that are happening? No, what's really cool is, you know, I think everybody mentioned, you know, feeling caught off guard in some way, right, by being asked to be part of this project. And it's really interesting because when I envisioned this lineup of editors, there was like a distinct moment where the lineup like happened and it clicked, and I was just like, oh, this is going to be so good. This is going to be so exciting. And I've known, you know, all four of you either like, you know, in some loose capacity, or our paths have crossed like very briefly prior to this. And for me, there's just something magical about betting on like a synthesis. And I think like bookmaking, and I think, you know, for everybody here, you know, has like experience in film, and so, you know, you understand that too. Like it is like a bet, right? A bit of a gamble every time you put a crew together. You just don't know what kind of chemistry comes out of that, and that's like the same thing for making a book. And you know, as somebody for whom bookmaking is my primary art form, actually, right? I'm like a bookmaker and writer who works at a film festival. This was like a really fantastic way for me to like fuse those things together. And having the four of you join me for at least like the commissioning part of the adventure was really exciting. And I think, you know, to many of your points about trying to figure out who and why, I think I'd love to hear a bit more about that. Someone mentioned like intimacy in a, you know, in a new kind of way. I definitely am super intimate with this book now, having read it cover to cover like 6 times. But yeah, like what were your processes like with commissioning? How did you go about those conversations? And like were there any interesting moments or really like surprising moments for you? Anyone can begin.
I think it was like, I think it's so funny. This is the first time I'm seeing Philbert honest, like actually your face. I don't think in any call, because you were away, I didn't actually see your face. So I'm actually seeing you for the first time, which is lovely face. Yeah, I think what Philbert was saying was true about the pandemic. Like, I think it was I mean, we were all going through things, and we're not going to have a pandemic conversation, but like, you know, it was rough on everybody for so many different reasons, and in unexpected ways. And so, you know, in one way it was very hopeful to be working on it. I agree. Like it gave, I don't know, for me, it gave me something, and I don't think I actually thought about it until Philbert just talked about it, but yeah, just having something to focus on, to work consistently on. We all work in the world of film, and that has been hard. The industry kind of shut down for many of artists. But that aside, like something to consistently think about, work on, engage with other people on, so you weren't so isolated. So in these very seemingly small but actually significant ways, you're able to kind of be in communion with people in a way, and because you have a role to do, a job to do, something to fulfill, something to work towards. So I think that in itself was quite intimate. And then I don't know, for myself, all the conversations that I was having with the people that I was working with directly in terms of contributors, because we were in a unique time putting together this kind of anthology, you're privy to things that people are going through, that they're experiencing. There's delays, there's, I had some people that were not able, did not have the capacity to contribute because of life, and not, and so the compassion grew, the the pace at which we were working shifted. And I think there was a particular kind of intimacy, had we not been doing it at this particular time, that may not have been there. And that there was something really powerful about that kind of intimacy. Like, we all knew we were doing the best we can. Everyone was kind of giving room and compassion for each other. And in the end, it still came together so beautifully as it would. But I think it was a very different process. And I'm someone who is a filmmaker, but, I have, my background is in journalism. And so, that's not the way it normally works, putting together publications. But I thought it was a healthier way of working in the midst of, the madness of everything.
For sure.
Yeah, just to go off of that point, Nayani, like I definitely like, for me, accessibility of like how can we like set the grounds for these artists and writers to like make the work that they're happy with. And so like whether that means like pushing the limits of the deadlines as much as possible. I'm so sorry, Jasmine. Like for then people to do that, or like, but also sometimes for example, like some of my artists, like I'd have like multiple brainstorming sessions with them, and because it was like it was like the first thing some of them have done back for like a year and a half. So it's like a lot of pressure that people put on themselves, and also like nervousness of like doing something new in this capacity. So that kind of like emotional support I was like not expecting, but like really, really appreciated, of like the intimacy of the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and so everything that the three of you have said has really resonated with me, like from thinking about working across distances over many months, to, the growing compassion and patience that Nayani was talking about, and having, timelines be kind of refigured and accommodated, as Khanh, you were saying. I mean, for me, majority of my commissioning process and editorial process took place while I was away from Canada. Um, I was visiting family in New Delhi, and I was only supposed to be there for a month, but because of the conditions of the pandemic, I was, basically stuck there for about 4 to 5 months. So that, I imagine, had a pretty significant impact in how, how I was thinking about the anthology, and how I was thinking about shaping these works, and the many, many, many conversations I've had individually over, like, as I've said in my like editor's notes, compromised phone networks, multiple WhatsApp calls with individual with each of my contributors. You know, I would imagine that the fact of distance and the fact of that transcontinental distance really kind of had an effect in how we were, you know, conceiving of these pieces. In terms of what like surprised me in the process, I mean, it's hard to say because each of these, each of the projects that I worked on and the contributors I worked with were so distinct and singular, and you know, each had their own surprise elements. But in a superficial sense, I'm thinking about particularly the visual commissions, because I've never, you know, worked with an artist to shape, you know, visual work. You know, it's mostly been text-based in the past. So I think it was really a great learning experience for me to work and collaborate with Rupali Marzaria on her graphic commission and Kendra Yee on her graphic commission. And, you know, Rupali's work is kind of using two particular, as you can see in Jasmine's screen, it's basically a comic book mashup like spread that is using visuals from Zarqa Nawaz's 1995 film Barbecue Muslims, and using text, you know, as almost as dialogue is used in comic books or in like Akira manga, from Midi Onodera's Made in Japan, a 1985 work. And both these works are comical and horrific in their own kind of ways, in their own distinct ways. And while Zarqa Nawaz's work is kind of, you know, in a very satirical, laugh out loud kind of way, depicting Islamophobia in the suburbs of Ontario, among like an Ontarian politas and suburbia, the horror of being, you know, suspected, you know, as a Muslim suburban dweller. It really just takes it to its, you know, to like the extreme, and like reveals a surveillance culture. And I think Rupali found that resonating oddly with Midi Onodera's work, where in Made in Japan, Midi Onodera is like created like a bit of like a mock ethnographic, a very mockumentary style, you know, series of shots, and the voiceover has her kind of, you know, really narrating North American preconceived notions on Japanese culture, and like, you know, stereotypes. So really just like the two experiences of being othered in a very post 9/11 kind of sense were reflected in Rupali's piece. It's almost like she's like dissected these two layers from these works and made it a totally different work and a totally different story, right? So in this way, I think the graphic commission became almost like an essay, you know, almost like a written essay, even though it's completely, almost entirely visual. And similarly for Kendra, you know, there's her two-page spread, as you can see on Jasmine's screen, very different from Rupali's, but there is like a bit of similarity when it comes to the layout and as well as the grid-like structure. Whereas Rupali's was very claustrophobic, colliding squares, colliding shapes. Kendra's is quite spaced out, very uniform. And like Kendra's work, if I can quickly, you know, talk about that, you know, was our conversations were kind of taking from, you know, the idea of like the film poster, the movie poster. How can we kind of comment on it? How can we deconstruct it or reinterpret it, so that the film poster becomes not just a passive promotional object, but really something of a character, right? Like something of a responder, something active. So over like multiple conversations and this long email thread where we were like sharing, like I was like sharing, you know, Hong Kong New Wave film posters with her, and like Mina Shum's Double Happiness, just like images of like immigrant domesticity in Canadian cinema. And Kendra really, returned to me with this brilliant, idea of including this kind of loose narrative of her great-grandfather's, I guess, day-to-day life in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, as a first-generation Chinese immigrant who had immigrated at the height of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And her yeye owned a store called Pete's Pantry Shelf, if I'm not wrong, which basically was a convenience mom and pop shop in Saskatchewan. And, a lot of the objects that you see on the borders of Kendra's work are objects that she has either visualized or interpreted or directly taken from, that are kind of lodged in the borders. And the work that Kendra, it's very terracotta hued, it's very warm to look at. There's a lot of redness in there, and there's a lot of layering of different images. So not only did it look cool visually to have that superimposition, but she's literally layering first generation Chinese Canadian experience over second generation Chinese Canadian experience over third generation, kind of in a way where each element looks like a little fridge magnet, or it looks like a little post-it note, or it looks like a flower vase. There's lots of flower vase in there, which kind of evokes the domestic space. What the interiors of a home are. So yeah, I think those two kind of anchors, the visual anchors, were probably the surprising, challenging things for me, because I had never kind of collaborated with anyone like that. But I'm so kind of grateful to Rupali and Kendra for their strong eye and just imagination.
How about Philbert? Anything surprising, interesting in your commissioning process?
Yeah, I think similar to Aaditya, like, both of us were away from Toronto during the majority of the process, and that definitely had an impact on how I eventually approached the commissioning process. Similarly, 2 months became 3 months, became half a year, became 7 months. Of course, because of the pandemic, but also just like personal reasons too. And that has to filter through, myself and then onto the work and the commissioning process. So, and also similarly to Khanh, I was pretty wide-eyed when I was asked to be in quote unquote editor. I didn't really know what was involved. And I kind of like shot for the stars. I'm like, yeah, I want to do this, foldouts here, comics here, round table here. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do all of it. It's going to be possible. And then, real life hit. I had to leave town. 7 months away, and then you really had to compromise and hone your focus. And because this is my first time being an editor on something, on a publication, I'm not sure if I went about it the right way. I feel like some of the other editors had a lot of conversations with artists, and maybe I was like, being too ambitious and like, no, I have this idea. You people have to fit into this idea. But I feel like because I was humbled by, real life experiences, you had to compromise. Then the conversations came, especially with the biggest piece I did, which is the roundtable about speculative futures and speculative narratives and sci-fi. And I remember having to pitch the idea. Hey, look at all of us in a Zoom roundtable. I remember one of the contributors, I don't want to name who, one in our initial call, because of the time zone difference, it was really chaotic. Like they were like bathing their kid whilst talking to me, and then I had to pitch them whilst the kid was like saying stuff in the background. It was like a really, really cute experience. But I think just like pitching the idea to all the artists and storytellers, specifically in the roundtable, Howie Xia, and Anna, and then Shauna, who's an academic. I feel like I had one idea and I kind of had to do a lot of research as to who would be the best to represent this roundtable. Not sure if that's a similar process to Jasmine. I really had to find like the right group of people to participate in this roundtable, and some of them whose work I just discovered because of this commissioning process, but others I knew, for years. So I think, and then, once I was able to come back, no, once I could come back to Toronto, another real life thing happened, and then more time was unavailable. So I had to discuss with Jasmine, how do I fill out the other spots? I feel like, I was too ambitious in the beginning, and then she was very comforting and reassuring and pitched me ideas. Well, you can do this and this. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes so much sense. Why didn't I think of that? So then the interview between Michael Fukushima and Lillian Chan came, and I feel like it was just fitting because Michael just retired and joined the board, and obviously we all know that the Animation Award is now named after him. I thought it was like super fitting to have his mark in this 25th anniversary publication. And then there's also Sookyun Lee, who I feel like kind of fit the goal that I wanted in terms of tackling techno-orientalism. It was the only narrative piece I commissioned, but she kind of took it and ran with it. And I feel like her piece was, so like awesomely weird and like totally up my alley and like playing with space and time. So it really like kind of tickled my sci-fi like nerves and everything. And I feel like just that piece existing in the book is a testament, and maybe kind of a rebellious act and a subversion to the notion of techno-orientalism, which is not just limited to fiction. It's very much in reality as well. So yeah, there was a lot of compromise and a humbling experience, but I'm like, I wouldn't change a thing because like I said earlier, it was such a healing process, and it all kind of amalgamated in the right way through ups and downs. Yeah, I'm just very happy for all the commissions that I worked with that ended up in the book.
And I think this was like a really unique process of, everybody, for one, having so many. Oh, am I frozen? I am very frozen. But can you hear me?
Yeah.
That's really strange. I'm just gonna. Okay, well, my video is not working right now, but I'm going to just finish up because we're going to go to the break. So I just want to like wrap up and say this process was really interesting for us because we split sort of the commissions between everybody, right? And then everybody sort of had free reign to go wherever they wanted with them. And then the anthology is just that reflection of that freedom. And I feel like that was such a liberating way to create an anthology that's otherwise guided by a very abstract idea of good or a very abstract idea of quality. So I do think this was really liberating and really healing for even for me to be able to work with editors who are so down to like go on this journey. And so with that said, we're going to take a 5-minute break right now. And then so folks can stretch your legs, go to washroom, get some water. And then when we come back, we'll have a couple more questions. And also there have been some questions coming in from the audience that we will look at. So see you all in 5 minutes. All right. We're just waiting for Nayani to return. In the meantime, I'm going to plug. So I ran out during the break to go get this. So backstory, if you don't know, but in 2007, Real Asian published the first anthology um, called Real Asian Canada on Screen. It was published through Coach House. It was edited by Elaine Chang, who's a professor at Guelph. And it's just, it's a massive book. And it was the first, honestly, the first anthology to really spotlight Asian filmmakers and Asian media artists in working in Canada. And it's a pretty heavyweight book. Lots and lots of really famous names in here, who were at that time, in their emerging in their careers, and or sort of like up and coming. And so the backstory of this book is that it was handed to me at my job interview for this festival. After I did my interview, the head of programming at the time gave me a copy of this book and said, Jasmine, you look like the kind of person who would read this anthology. And she was right. I was that type of person. And so I read it cover to cover and loved it. I loved, what it was doing, its content, everything. And then I also um, was very cognizant that it was a very unfriendly book. It's just like, it's just hard text, like from beginning to end with stills in between. Um, and I think, this reflects obviously a traditional anthology format. Um, and so from 2018, which is when I first got this book, there was already in the back of my head, like, we got to make another one. We got to make another one at some point. And I pitched the idea in 2019 to our ED at the time, Deanna. And that's how Rites of Passage came out, addressing, I think, a lot of the spirit of the first anthology that I really loved, but also trying to disrupt and intervene in some of the limitations that I found with the first book. And so notably with the commissions, there are no overlaps. There are no repeating names from the first anthology to the second anthology. And this was done really deliberately. And I know with the editors, right, when we were going back and forth in the name lists, there was like a comparison. And I think I provided a list of the names that were in the first anthology and be like, telling us like, oh, let's commission other folks. There's so many other folks. And I think, I kind of want to think about, I'm personally thinking about abundance in this conversation. I've really felt the abundance in this anthology, not just from the commissioning side, but the design and the copy edit, like every stage of the process for me has been an experience of abundance of talent and work and care. So, how have you experienced, producing this kind of critical work um, for this anthology? And maybe it's like a offshoot of something you've already said, or have something new to bring to this conversation, but what does it mean for you to be like making this kind of work, making this kind of book, um, for yourselves, for the people around you, for the industry or the ecosystem or the community you care about? Maybe anyone want to start? Yeah. Oh yeah, Nayani.
I think for me, like, I talk about this a lot because it's like it's what it is for me. So it comes up every time. But there's many communities that fall within or under the umbrella of Asian and in diaspora, that intersects with other identities as well. And so I think a lot about displacement because my family is displaced and my community has been displaced, and we're not the only Asian community that has been displaced. And so that's always kind of at the center of my work, this investigation, documentation, consistent reflection on what that displacement, even if it's not what the work is about, it informs the work in so many ways. So I'm always thinking about displacement, and in thinking about displacement, I'm thinking about archive and what has been lost. and what is being created actively and what is being recreated. Yeah, that's from Renata's. It's so stunning. Renata Mohammed. Yeah, I'm always thinking about the archive, and so how can I contribute to an archive, and I think archives can and should take different forms and shapes. And my archive, I think about it, yes, I'm Tamil, but my archive is also Toronto, and it's also Scarborough, and it's also, a particular experience here. It's also an archive of the intersection of like my chosen family, not just my blood family and my lineage. So this was, for me, and a reason why I wanted to participate was a way of contributing to and creating a complicated archive, which I think is really important as it exists here. And so, yeah, I think this idea of an archive just kept coming up, and that connected to displacement. And you can also be here and be displaced on this land, and so yeah, that was always circulating in my head over and over again, this archive.
Anyone want to jump on that?
I was thinking about, I guess, what it looks like to interact with film work specifically. Like, I think a lot about like the barriers that exist that stop people from like wanting to speak out loud their thoughts about artwork or film because they feel like they're unqualified or they don't know enough. Like personally, my background is I went to film school, so like we had like an extremely prescriptive way of interpreting work, which was like, well, this scene is really sad because the curtains are blue, and like he's really powerful because like it's a low angle, which is like one way of definitely interpreting a film. But I'm like, I guess like doing years and years of film school, I feel really fresh, like feel stagnant in that, and I'm interested in like so many other opinions and like ways of like feeling art and like feeling film. So like often I'll be in a scenario where I'll watch a movie with somebody and like I'm like, what do you think? And they're like, oh well, I don't really know. I don't know, like you tell me what you think. And it's kind of like this imposter syndrome about like their own feelings. And so kind of going off what Nayani is saying of like building an archive of like maybe voices that are not considered whatever experts of like film criticism, which I read often. And so I really like, actually with Winnie's piece, we had a lot of conversation about that. Winnie wrote a reflection piece on Minsuk Lee's Migrant Dreams, and like we talked a lot about like why I felt Winnie was actually like a great person to write about it, because like they're like a young person who's like interested in food justice, and they work in the Toronto Food Justice Group. Oh my gosh, I am butchering food policy. Yes. And so I'm like, I think that's a really interesting perspective of like approaching the film. And they found out about the movie through like an organizing event that food policy group had. But like, there's so much like fear of like not being the expert of like, why should my voice be heard? And so like, I think also maybe I'm a little bit circling, but like Ashley's father's piece, Ashley Young's father's piece, like he's beginning actually the process of writing a book about his life as like a Vietnamese refugee, and then he like went to Iran and then became a refugee there, and now he's here in Toronto. Is he in Toronto?
No, he's in
Edmonton.
Somewhere.
He's in Alberta.
Somewhere in the prairies.
Yeah, somewhere in the prairies. And so I think about like, I remember telling my parents about that story, and I'm like, wow, like this is so interesting. One day he just emailed Ashley, like Ashley's father emailed her like an 80-page letter, basically detailing his whole life, in the form of like, dear Ashley, Yale is her Vietnamese name. So like, I think a lot about like when somebody feels like their story is worth telling,
Mm.
and like how that fits into like an archival book, and like how that gets passed down to like high school students or like art workers and things like that. So like a lot of like demystifying like whose voice matters, and like yeah, just like taking away the magic of film. It's like it's like very touchable. It's like, you know, we're so close to it, like we all have an opinion on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, just like to quick, I'm like really moved by that story. I think it really resonates in a strange way, because when deciding to order this book, like I think I decided on the order of it basically alone, because of time constraints. But I opened the anthology with Nayani's commission of Kavi and Ananya's piece, right? Which is, you know, Ananya as a mother speaking with her child Kavi about stories that Kavi's dreaming up. And so the anthology opens with Kavi stories. And Ashley and her father's piece isn't the second last piece. And I actually really wanted to end on Toko's Mina Shum spread. And so Ashley's and her father's piece comes right before that. And it's really interesting that the book, you know, begins with a generation that nobody would give publication space to on, you know, like reasonably, right? Like it's a 6-year-old telling us what kind of stories they want to see on TV. And then the anthology winds down with this back and forth letter, right, between a father and their child. So, you know, that's really, I think there's like an interesting resonance there that happened. That's really cool. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Aditya or Philbert?
Yeah, thank you, Nayani and Khan, for that. And I agree, Jasmine. Like, I was so moved by Ananya and Kavi's piece. And I, you know, once we get to that point in the conversation, I would love to hear from Nayani what that process was like to work with the both of them. And yeah, it's just so brilliant, opening to the anthology. Yeah, I'm trying to gather my thoughts.
Yes, we can circle back. Philbert, do you have any thoughts you want to share first?
Yeah.
We can keep circling.
Pass the hot potato. Yeah, I want to go off of what Nayani and Khan said about archiving, and also what Jasmine said about how like the abundance of talent in the community and the purposeful direction of not repeating anybody from the first book. I think that gave me a lot of direction. And maybe selfishly, I just couldn't shake the need to talk about speculative fiction and sci-fi and futuristic narratives within the quote unquote like Asian space, whatever that means. So yeah, I really couldn't shake it off. So I guess I made it my like goal to talk about speculative narratives and techno-orientalism, or at least attempt to do that. And yeah, back to the whole archival thing, you know, even before I solidified the whole roundtable idea, I had many conversations with, I got to shout them out, Aaron Collier, the head of programming, Chris Chin, operations manager, who's also just like the real Asian historian, and also a little bit with Kelly Louie as well, who's also a programmer of Real Asian. I picked all of their brains about like, oh, you know, I've only been part of the festival for so many years, and you know, before my time, what was the landscape in terms of Asian speculative narratives and science fiction storytelling? And honestly, like we had to dig like super deep. It was like a limited list. And then, I remember some email thread with Aram talking about, there is a tendency to look back in time as a form of archiving or testimony or just proof of existence. And that may be, fueled by gatekeeping in terms of grants and funding and whoever controls the resources, to provide storytellers with the empowerment to tell stories. And I was like, at one point I got a little bit angry and frustration. It's like, why can't the future be a point of testimony? Why can't the future or speculative narratives be evidence of existence? Why does it always have to like tether to the past, and with techno-orientalism, like we're essentially erased from all these imagined futures. And I'm such a, for myself, I'm such a fan of sci-fi because I want to project into the future, maybe as an act of, I'm going to be there, you better watch it, I'm going to be there in the future. So like there's a lot of those types of conversations, even outside of those, the three people I mentioned, just to like hone my focus onto why I'm doing this, why I had the urge to tackle these topics. And it just came down to what Jasmine said, it came down to the need to put that into print, into this anthology, into this artifact, so that it's going to be in the future, whether you like it or not. Like I said in the beginning, 100 years from now, somebody is going to dust off that book and all our names are going to be there, and there's nothing you can do about it, whoever the powers to be, white supremacy, god damn you, kind of thing. So I think in that sense, it's such a privilege and honor to have this type of critical text and conversation just cemented in this publication, because it's evidence that we are here, and it's not just the past that empowers us, the future is going to empower us whether you like it or not.
Such a good answer. Aaditya, are your thoughts gathered?
Yes, I was just in awe of Phil's response.
Spicy.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm thinking about the anthology form, and thinking about the projects that I have worked with, the people that I've worked with, it's interesting because each, when you view it all together, or when I view my micro list of contributions from the different contributors together, each work speaks to one another in its own way, and the meaning of the work, of each individual work, changes when seen against another, right? So, I mean, and I wonder what it was like for you, Jasmine, because you are having a more macro perspective of it, right? You are able to kind of look at how perhaps a contributor from Phil and Nayani and Khanh and me, each of us is kind of speaking to one another, or not, right? Where are the gaps? So yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about, the kind of, really speaking to the whole idea of the canon and, expertise and the expert voice. Really, I wanted to break it down. I wanted to kind of, I guess, rethink that authorial voice, particularly in Saroja's piece. So Maria Saroja Penambulum has a short story. She calls it a hybrid short story that is partly kind of taking from, diary entry style of writing. It's partly episodic. It's, also inspired by screenplay writing. And that work really kind of dwells on the, visual motif of waterfalls that are a big part of her work lately. And how waterfalls as a natural element and as part of a natural landscape, their relationship with mental health and with familial care and memory. So, I mean, it's interesting to see, you know, I kind of wanted her to, I basically just went to her with like, Saroj, I really wanted you, would you want to write a screenplay? You know, I really just want you to like write a movie or something like that. And I just want to like see, I just want to like enter your mind, you know? And so I just like sent her like examples of like scripts I could find online of like When Harry Met Sally or like, you know, My Own Private Idaho. Um, and I think what Saroja responded to was like thinking about the episodes, right, in her narrative that she wants to distill. And a lot of this is very fictional. A lot of these characters are speculative as well. But the landscapes, whether it's the, you know, Niagara Falls in Ontario or the Kutralam Falls in Tamil Nadu, you know, in India, those landscapes are intact. And the characters are, you know, visiting these landscapes, their kind of mental lives, their interiority is being structured by these landscapes. And the text in itself uses like, you know, it goes from text message to artist notes to, you know, describing a photograph to narrating the events of a day. So I think that was particularly interesting for me to work with, because it isn't, you know, it isn't a very, you know, it isn't cohesive from the start, you know, and it becomes cohesive as piece goes on. Yeah, and I think like, I mean, we really thought a lot about Kathleen Collins's work. She was a late writer and filmmaker and novelist, and a lot of her writing is very memoirist. And a lot of it's very fragmented, a lot of it's very dreamlike. And I think in you know, the anthology form that we are talking about, Saroja's kind of piece to me stands out as being the most hermetic, the most dreamlike, the most you know, there's distortions in there that you are invited to make sense of, you are invited to pick apart. But when I contrast that with something like Sarah Chibber's essay, which is very much a critical film analysis and a contextual kind of political reading of Srinivas Krishna's Masala, which is a 1991 Toronto-based filmmaker's film, it feels so distinct. It feels so, you know, disparate, but at the same time, you can tell that they're both kind of meditating on Torontonian landscapes and, you know, the landscapes where people continue to be displaced, as Nayani said. You know, and like revisiting that, right? Like it is something you would imagine in an anthology, you know, an older 90s Toronto film, there being an essay on that, but revisiting that film in a contextual sense, and for, you know, for that to be connected in a way with the other images and the other texts that you see in the anthology, that I think is still something that I'll have to process as I revisit and reread a lot of these works. Yeah.
It came to mind, if I could
for sure.
step in to Aditya's question as well, but also to what Phil was saying, like in terms of, you know, I'm thinking about like the future and however we want to define how we're imagining the future. And also in terms of themes, I'm thinking, because Aditya mentioned like themes, and I'm thinking about even, and it's just coming together for me now, but I'm thinking about some of the contributors I work with, and I think family, I think reimagining the future, I think making sense of the past. These are all themes that seem to inadvertently show up throughout the anthology, which, you know, connects back to Rites of Passage. And my process was like, I didn't really have a particular goal in mind. I just wanted to have different people that I thought wouldn't make sense to everyone coming together, but made sense to me coming together as contributors. And everyone kind of, you know, ran with their own ideas. So I did get to your question, like when I was talking to Ananya, like, you know, I just invited Ananya to participate, and it was Ananya's idea to include Kavi, and I was like, that's phenomenal. I'm totally down with that. That's really cool, you know. And so everything was kind of, it just organically happened. Everyone just kind of came up with their own ideas. But I think about that, you know, particular, and that process was interesting. It was long, like, you know, just scanning, it was hard, like, you know,
Right.
you had to be in the place that she felt like making her art, like she
Yeah.
couldn't be forced, just like any of us, you know. And you know, and inviting Ananya to write like kind of a reflection that goes with it, and then Jasmine had the great idea of turning it into stickers, and it just became this beautiful thing. And for me, that was really exciting, because I think looking at what Kavi created and contributed felt like who I was as a kid, and who I think many of us were in our own, you know, unique ways were as children. So anyways, just thinking about that particular contribution, mother and daughter, and then thinking about maybe Renata's piece, like looking back and looking at the experience of Indo-Guyanese folks and kind of indentureship and you know, in the Caribbean, and Asian folks in the Caribbean, and then looking at Tiffany Shung's piece with, you know, like, you know, looking at her particular films and the familial theme coming up continuously. I think all of that inadvertently, like, you know, kind of what Philbert was saying, you know, looks at the future and looks at the past. And, you know, Kavi's work is, you know, futuristic. It's imagining what she'd like to see. And, you know, that's maybe not how she would define it, or, you know, or even what Ananya and I were thinking about the time, but it is that, right? So it's just fascinating to me how inadvertently everything did become about rites of passage.
Awesome. Yeah, oh my goodness, there's so many thoughts. I think I addressed the macro question. Definitely when I got the full lineup of pieces to look at, just overwhelming to see the connections. You know, in front of every, so the anthology is structured with a section of stills and then a section that belongs to an editor. So 90 section opens the anthology, and then you have another set of stills, then it's my section, another set of stills, Aaditya's section, another set of stills, Philbert section, another set of stills, Khanh section. And all the stills that, you know, we had a separate invite list for filmmakers to contribute stills, and that list included contributors in the anthology who had already were writing text pieces for us, but also folks who said, I don't have capacity. We invited, okay, well, if you don't have capacity to write a piece for us, or, you know, generate a bigger piece, like, do you want your film work to be featured in the anthology? And then we had a miscellaneous list of names, right? The editors submitted names, our own staff put in names, and we just did a mass call out for filmmakers to insert themselves essentially into the narrative, if you will. And I think one of the, you know, I'm thinking about memory a lot in this conversation now too. There's, you know, and I mentioned, like, you know, there's this insertion of like a child's like vision of narrative and stories that is not yet exactly weighed down by grants, right? And I think that's such a beautiful way to open up the possibility for us, right? And Kavi's stories, if you actually read them, and you know, this is a good plug to get the book, because they're some of the deepest log lines I've seen in a long time. Kami's a bit of a genius. They're so overwhelmingly impressive. I think I read a couple up to Khanh, and then we like kind of screamed at each other. And then, you know, there are emerging artists writing about older filmmakers. You know, like Rupali's piece, like Winnie's piece, like Rhea's piece. There's just, you know, and even Syra, right? Like the responding to older works. And then you have filmmakers writing about themselves, right? You have Minsuk. Minsuk's in the book writing about Minsuk. And Tiffany's in the book writing about Tiffany. And I just love that swing of, you know, like, here, you know what Phil said, like, God damn it, like, we're just gonna be here however we want to be here. And I love that so much. And there was just so much opportunity to open the still section and have those stills be resonating with pieces in the sections that come after. And what it really performs or demonstrates for me, which is everything I hope this anthology would do, is to remind us that like we were always here. There is memory, there is lineage, and there's so much, you know, there's so much we already have and that we can already take. And it's just that we haven't been listened to properly. And I think that's just, you know, this anthology is an exercise of sustained listening, I think, for me, or sustained attention, you know, in the more general sense. Um, and so I think like this leads into a really great audience question that is very similar to a question that I had. So I'm going to read it out here. It says, what kind of life do you want this anthology to have in this world? When it comes to how the readers will engage with the anthology, what are your dreams and fruitions regarding the future of the anthology? Does anyone want to tackle that? You know, there's 15 minutes to the conversation, so maybe like some short reflections on this question.
Could you say it again, Jasmine?
Sure. What kind of life do you want the anthology to have in this world? I think, you know, they're thinking about readers. How do you imagine this anthology interacting with, I guess, people outside of us now that it's going to go, it's going to go into the world?
I would just hope that like it's such a solid collection of like so many different perspectives and points of view and positions. Like I just think I would hope that there's something in it for everybody that when they read it, even if it's one piece, they're like, you know, it resonates, it connects, it hits something, you know, whether it resonates or it makes them think or it makes them sit with it. Like there's certain pieces that I read online, even that I read something last year and I keep returning to this writer's work, like the same interview every 3-4 weeks because it does something for me. So I think I would hope that there's just something in it for everyone. Yeah, simply put, like not to be a cliche, but I just feel like I hope so sincerely that something resonates with everyone that comes in contact with it. Because I think if it does, then we've done our job, you know?
For sure.
I was thinking a lot of like my 16-year-old cousin while I was making this. She's like really into editing. She makes like AMVs. AMVs are like, is it animated music videos? She'll like cut together anime to like a song. And I've had like a lot of conversations with her about like, she doesn't have to go into film, but just like, I'm just curious about her interest in it. And like, it seems like in her mind, like AMV is like separate from like filmmaking. Like that's like, these are different things. And so a lot of the time, like while this book was being made and like seeing the submission, like the work that was coming through from all of you folks and also like on my end too, I was like really excited to see it. I'm like, wow, there's so many different ways of like responding to work. Like, for example, Ria's piece, Ria made like a cootie catcher in response to Wexford Plaza, and like and also like role played on Omegle. Oh, it's so good. But it's like I don't ever like, I was thinking a lot of my little cousin of like there's so many ways to exist in film, and like I really want that to be maybe like an educational point of like not only for like 16-year-olds have to read through it, but like teachers or like English teachers who have like those video assignments, like just like thinking of like non-prescriptive ways of like interacting with film or responding. And so I think it's helpful that it's like Real Asian as an institution has this publication, and then maybe some high school teachers will like actually will listen to it, and like, or you know, hopefully like film school or art school teachers like will kind of like allow room for that.
We're sending them copies, no worries.
Yeah, every single one of them.
I don't know if we have that many.
Send it to my high school film teacher.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's totally the place this anthology should go, to educators. Phil or Aaditya?
Yes. Yeah, thinking about what Nayani was saying about the returning to the anthology, and that really struck with me because the object, this text-based, visual text-based object, that's really kind of what I guess I would want, is that for the anthology to have return value, for it to have repeat value, for any time a reader picks it up and reads it, or glimpses across it, for them to kind of want to visit it again and to look at another piece again. And just thinking about the large anthology format and how it can appear intimidating, how it can appear, as the previous rewrites of Passage appear to have its own limitations, right, in terms of probably being rather academic, perhaps only containing like seminal voices. I think in this case, it would, I wonder if it really opens things up for readers, and if instead of seeming very abstract and large and dense and institutional, if it can be seen through a hyperlocal lens, through not only a very GTA-based lens, but also, for example, like one of the pieces that I was working with Madhi Chaudhary is a personal essay, kind of a love letter to St. Jamestown, and the everyday practice of cinema in St. Jamestown, and really kind of becoming educated in a different kind of cinephilia, growing up in this densely populated, mostly, populated by immigrants, working class folks, township. And what is cinephilia like there? For a reader to kind of pick the anthology up and resituate it back in St. Jamestown, or in a Regent Park, or just in Toronto, I think that's special, and that's not a lot of anthology formats and not a lot of text do that, and I hope they do, because all our contributors are really traversing such different territories, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Philbert?
Yeah, I'll keep the answer to the question short, but first I gotta shout out to AMVs. That's a legit art form that I'll debate anybody who says otherwise. Brings me back to before YouTube, when you had to download those AMVs just to see them. So yeah, it's a legit art form. But yeah, answering what our dreams and fruitions regarding the anthology, I definitely had touched upon it. I just hope that it's like a tome of existence. The fact that this anthology and this publication exists is a protest, and it's gonna be a protest for the future, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I just hope that it stays and exists, and as long as it exists, people will discover it, and I hope more people discover it, because you can go back to it over and over again. And yeah, it's a testimony of us right here and for years to come. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In the spirit of that, I'm gonna spring a surprise one on you, because for me, when I got the anthology, the first thing I thought of was all the people that we couldn't fit in here. And that was just really a struggle for me the whole time. And actually last night at opening night, I bumped into to Young Chang, and I was like, hey, I'm sorry. I forgot to ask you to contribute your stills before the deadline. And to me it was really heartbreaking when I remembered that, Young's work. I'm a huge fan of Young's work, and I just not been able to get my stuff together in time to include him on that list. And it's just these little things. Young Chang, Lulu Wei, some docu filmmakers whose work I've really enjoyed even just recently. So do any of you want to shout out folks that you really wanted to include but didn't make it off the top of your head? Just give them some shout out, Rue. No?
Honestly, not in a callous way. I think from the beginning, I just knew we couldn't do everything.
Yeah, of course.
And
No.
no, but I understand because I felt that way in other circumstances. And to be honest, it maybe didn't cross my mind because I'm trying to actively be like, this is not the be all and everything,
yes,
you
for
know?
sure.
But it's
Mhm.
hard because how many times do we get the chance and the funding to
Yes.
actually do something like this, you know? And that's the hard part. And I think that's a struggle for Asian filmmaker, Asian artists, programmers, as well as like, you know, as BIPOC across the board, right? Is like you want to do these wonderful, incredible, necessary projects. And at the same time, like we don't get many chances to do it at this scale. And that's like,
Mhm.
that's sad. That's actually the heartbreaking part, because if, you know, in all honesty, if we could do this every year and there could be like multiple opportunities to highlight and honor and pay respect to all the work that's been created and it is being created and will be created, that would be the joy. So I don't know, it's something I think about a lot, is like when we're organizing archives and projects and things to be shared with community and in the public. There's a lot of people I would name, so I don't even want to say any names now because then I'll forget people, and that's not okay. But you know, I think that for me, this whole project also, you know, begs the question of like, why are we so limited? Like, and I don't mean that we limit ourselves, but we're limited by money, we're limited by capitalism, we're limited by funding, we're limited by so many things that, and still we are able to create this abundance with the, you know, the amount of, you know, the in hindsight, not a lot. I mean, yes, it was enough to get it done, but you know, if we could have the abundance to create something consistently and, you know, it could change every year, it could be new editors, like we could highlight different people, that would be the dream. So I'm hesitant to answer, one, because I don't want to leave anybody out, but two, also because I want us to like question our feeling guilty about how, you know, what we can do within our capacity as racialized and Asian individuals ourselves.
For sure, for sure. I don't think it's, yeah, definitely. I think I echo all of those feelings. Just like, oh, I want to make a third one. And then also want to sleep.
Yes. Just quickly, I'll add that I think a lot of the contributors that or not a lot, just a few of the contributors that I was in my long list that I was potentially considering to collaborate with that couldn't work out, like still ended up being in the realm of the anthology in some way, either, you know, like with others, or like, for example, like Khanh, you worked with Vida, and, you know, I think that was like incredible. And, you know, so I think that like the fact that they populated the universe for me of the anthology, you know, that was meaningful.
Anyone else want to incriminate themselves or absolve themselves?
I'll try to answer this quickly. Similar to Nayani, like there is like in my mind a list of names, and I don't want to name any one of them just to, you know, not to spotlight anybody, but there is a list of specifically illustrators and visual artists and painters who I've discovered in the journey of like researching and finding people to commission. And I mentioned before that there are a lot of, I had to compromise a lot. So the pieces that ended up in the book through my commissions were more conversation and text based. But at the beginning, when I was like shooting for the stars, there's a lot of visual ideas that I wanted to implement. So, and you know, I was lucky enough to be welcomed and exposed to the zine community in the GTA. You know, I consider myself like a rookie zine person. And, you know, I asked all my zine friends to recommend me artists that could, you know, create really awesome concept art or comics that that challenge techno-orientalism. So like I have a huge like Excel list of like, oh, I'm gonna follow this person on Instagram. Like my followers, just my following list number just like shot up during the process of this anthology. So there are a lot of visual artists that I really wanted to work with, and I think also have the right to be remembered and archived through their art. And they, just specifically like sci-fi speculative art, like it's so gorgeous, all the stuff that I discovered. So yeah, just long list of zine artists and such, and people like that. Yeah.
Khanh, any short, sweet bites or?
Yeah,
yes?
well, I would just, yeah, like going off of everyone's points, and like I work as like a crew, like a tech in film. So like I did think a lot about like Asian people who work in like those tech positions that aren't really interested in being in an anthology or like creating pieces that would be in a book, right? But like how like there are other ways of archiving that are outside of this book, or like there is like sound, there's like sound film Asian artists that I thought are so fascinating, but it was like, how do I convey sound? There probably is a way, and there definitely has been done, but like it's just like I just had to like, yeah, abundance mindset. Like there's endless opportunities of like other ways of archiving these like amazing people who like have really fascinating perspectives, but like maybe this is not the time. Same thing of like capacity, COVID, all these things of like, so I didn't want to like put so much pressure. So I really am like, oh, this is like a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver. Like this book could be like 6,000 pages
Yes.
and you can still have people missing. Like,
yes, for sure.
it's just like, yeah. But yeah, it just, I too had the Excel sheet and like ended up following a bunch of people, and it just made me like extremely excited. And like, I remember even when I had like all my commissions done, I just like had this got into this habit of like finding out about new people and like connecting and like seeing where like the web of like filmmakers are and like artists, and that was really fun to do, and I still do it. So it's like glad I got that habit from this project.
Yeah, I think for all of us, like I think whether it's, abundance or a twinge of like desire or whatever it is, right? The yearning for more inclusion, I think that's really powerful and wonderful relational support, right? Now we know about these projects, and I really hope that translates for our readers as well. And I mean, we're reaching the end of this panel, and I just want to shout out this, this book was made by many people. There's the four of us here, the five of us here today, but there's also the copy team with Saba and James. There's the design team with Atima, Yuhei, and Abby, and there's Carice, who's currently in the comments on on the other side right now, who made our website and is running our Instagram, and all the many people from our own support networks who contributed like their time and labor to our thinking and our processing of this work. So if anything, this book, even its limitations, just reminds us that we overflow. And that's like, I think, a really great note that we can end on. So, with that said, I want to thank all four of you today for having this conversation with me. Silent applause. Thank you so much for your insight, for your care work. This is a beautiful book. For folks who are watching, please come join the film forum. The QR code will be up on the end card. When we wrap, there will be a conversation about this anthology next Thursday night at 9 p.m. On our What's Brewing channel. So you can come find me there. I also want to, thank again our sponsors, specifically Canada Council for the Arts, for funding this project. And then for this panel today, I would like to thank Joanne, Carmelle, digital tech producers, Mimi and Joe. I'd like to thank Samir and Kelly for helping us to mod. Just a reminder that Relation is happening until November 19th. You can go online to see all our programming there. Tomorrow we have a panel with RAX and the award ceremony happening at 7 p.m. And actually later tonight, there's the Unsung Voices, the Emerging Filmmaker Program Q&A happening. So catch the short. Weeda's in it. Weeda's in this anthology, isn't it? James, our resources editor on the team, is having a film premiere at Unsung Voices. So go support your community. And yeah, thanks for joining us today. Our next Real Ideas panel is on Saturday. So hopefully we'll see you there. Thanks, everyone.